"If you can translate this, I'll give you my job," laughed the director, and the black maid silenced him. Michelle Johnson was wiping the marble floor on the 32nd floor when she heard the loud laughter coming from the executive office. For 3 years, she had worked in that corporate building in New York City, always arriving before sunrise and leaving after all the executives had gone home. That's when Richard Peterson walked into the hallway, laughing loudly with 3 other men in suits, waving a yellowed paper in his right hand. "Hey everyone, I found this old document in my father-in-law's safe," said Richard, still laughing. "It's all in Chinese or whatever this is. I can't even imagine what it says." The men approached the coffee table near the elevators, where Michelle continued cleaning in silence, as she always did when they appeared. "If you can translate this, I'll give you my job," Richard guffawed, tossing the document onto the glass table right in front of her. The other executives burst into laughter, as if it were the funniest joke in the world. Michelle paused for a moment, looking at the paper that had landed right beside where she was cleaning. "Seriously, Richard," said one of the men, still laughing. "Imagine if the cleaning lady knew Chinese. That'd be her big break, wouldn't it?" Michelle felt something burn in her chest. It wasn't anger, it was something deeper. It was the exhaustion of years of being invisible, of pretending not to hear the cruel jokes, of smiling when they didn't even acknowledge her. She dropped the cleaning cloth onto the cart and carefully picked up the document. The paper was yellowed with age, its delicate characters written in black ink. "This document," Michelle began, her voice steady, "is a property rights transfer contract written in traditional Mandarin, dated 15 years ago." The silence was immediate. Richard stopped laughing mid-chuckle, his mouth still hanging open in shock. "What?" he stammered. Michelle continued reading, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Here it states that Mr. Wei Jiang transfers all rights to the property located at Broadway, number 2847, to Richard Peterson Wilson, in exchange for $50,000. Signed on March 15, 2009. The 3 executives exchanged confused glances. Richard tried to snatch the paper from her hands, but Michelle had already taken a step back. "But how do you know Chinese?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse. "Mandarin," Michelle corrected. "And that's not all I know." She turned the document over, where smaller notes were written in the margin. "These notes here say that this contract was never officially registered. And there's something else interesting." Michelle paused, watching the panic beginning to form on Richard's face. "Mr. Wei Jiang's signature is forged. The handwriting isn't consistent, especially in the 3rd character of the surname." "You're making this up," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm not making up anything," Michelle replied, folding the document and tucking it into her uniform pocket. "I worked 15 years as a certified translator before coming here. The revelation hit like a bomb." The other executives slowly backed away from Richard, as if suddenly realizing they were involved in something much bigger than they'd imagined. "I worked in notary offices, courts, consulates," Michelle continued, "specialized in Asian documents, spoke 5 languages fluently and had my own office downtown." "If you had all that, what are you doing here cleaning floors?" asked one of the executives, genuinely confused. Michelle smiled bitterly. "I lost everything in 2018. My office went bankrupt after a lawsuit that cost me all my savings. Lawsuit filed by a company claiming I had falsified a translation of an import contract." Richard was growing paler by the second. The company's name was Peterson and Associates. The name hung in the air like a verdict. Richard swallowed hard, trying to formulate a response, but couldn't find the words. "You destroyed me based on a lie," said Michelle, her voice quiet but heavy with emotion. "You took my career, my home, my dignity. I had to sell everything to pay the legal fees." That has nothing to do with me," Richard stammered. "It has everything to do with you," Michelle replied. "Because it was your father-in-law, Wei Jiang, who filed the lawsuit, and now I find out you have forged documents with his signature. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now continuing. The executives began to disperse, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Richard was left alone in the hallway with Michelle, unsure how to react. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "For now, nothing," Michelle said, picking up the cleaning rag again. "But rest assured I will uncover the whole truth about this document and what you and your father-in-law did to me." Richard tried to sound threatening, but his voice came out shaky. "You can't prove anything, it's your word against mine." "Really?" Michelle smiled for the first time. "Then why are you trembling?" She went back to mopping the floor as if nothing had happened. Richard stood there for a few seconds, visibly shaken, before heading toward the elevator. That night, Michelle arrived home at the small apartment she shared with her teenage daughter, Emily, in the Bronx. It was a modest place, but it was theirs. "Mom, how was work today?" Emily asked, looking up from the books scattered on the kitchen table. "Different," Michelle replied, sitting beside her daughter. "Very different." Emily noticed something in her mother's tone. "Did something happen?" Michelle hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell her everything. Emily listened in silence, her eyes widening as the story unfolded. "Mom, does this mean you can get everything back?" Emily asked when Michelle finished. "I don't know, sweetheart, but it means I finally have a chance to uncover the truth." Michelle stayed up all night, her mind racing. She remembered perfectly the lawsuit that had destroyed her life. She had been accused of falsifying a translation of a contract between Wei Jiang and an American company for importing electronic equipment. At the time, she had translated the document correctly, but Wei Jiang claimed she had altered figures and clauses. The lawsuit dragged on for 2 years, costing her all her savings in legal fees until she was found guilty. Now, holding that forged document, she began to realize she had been the victim of a much larger scheme. The next day, Michelle arrived at work determined. She knew Richard would be watching her, so she decided to act normally while investigating. During her lunch break, when the floor was empty, she managed to access Richard's office. She knew his routine perfectly. He always left at 12:30 p.m. to eat at the Japanese restaurant on the corner and didn't return until 2 p.m. The office was luxurious, with a mahogany desk and shelves full of books that had likely never been opened. Michelle searched for more documents, anything that could help her understand the connection between Richard and Wei Jiang. That's when she found inside a discreet folder a series of printed emails. The correspondence was between Richard and Wei Jiang, and what Michelle read left her stunned. The emails confirmed that Wei Jiang was indeed Richard's father-in-law, but they revealed much more. They had devised a plan to remove Michelle from their path because she had uncovered irregularities in other contracts she translated for them. In one of the messages, Wei Jiang wrote, "The translator is asking too many questions about the amounts. We need to get rid of her before she uncovers the whole scheme." Michelle photographed all the emails with her phone. Her hands trembled as she realized the extent of the betrayal she had suffered. There were more documents in the folder, contracts in Mandarin, all with the same crude forgery of Wei Jiang's signature. Apparently, Richard had been using his father-in-law's name to close fraudulent deals for years. One of the contracts particularly caught Michelle's attention. It was an agreement for the sale of a property in upstate New York, dated just 2 months earlier. The amount was $2 million, but the document was full of inconsistencies. "What are you doing here?" Richard's voice made her freeze. He was standing at the office door with an expression of fury she had never seen before. "I was cleaning," Michelle said, trying to discreetly put away her phone. "Cleaning inside my drawer." Richard moved toward her. "Give me that." He tried to grab Michelle's phone, but she was faster. "I've seen everything, Richard," she said, keeping her distance. "The emails, the fake contracts, the whole scheme." "You don't understand anything," Richard said, clearly desperate. "These things are more complicated than they seem." "I understand perfectly," Michelle replied. "I understand that you and your father-in-law destroyed me to hide your crimes." Richard changed tactics, trying to appear calm. "Look, Michelle, I know you've been through a lot. How about we talk? I'm sure we can come to an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "I can offer you compensation. A good amount. You won't have to work as a cleaner anymore. You can go back to being a translator." "With what money?" "The money you stole using fake documents." Richard's expression hardened again. "You can't prove anything. They're just some old papers." "Old? They're enough evidence to open an investigation," Michelle said. "And I'm sure once they start digging, they'll find much more." Richard realized he had lost this round, at least for now. "What do you want?" I want you to confess everything. Admit that you filed that lawsuit against me based on lies. I want my reputation back. And if I don't confess, then I'll take all this to the proper authorities and let them decide." Richard fell silent for a few seconds, clearly weighing his options. "I need time to think." "You have until tomorrow," Michelle said, putting away her phone and picking up the cleaning supplies. "After that, I'll take the necessary steps." She left the room, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts. She knew she had taken a big risk, but she could no longer pretend nothing had happened. That afternoon, Michelle worked as usual, but she could feel Richard's eyes on her whenever he appeared in the hallway. He was clearly nervous, making several calls and speaking in hushed tones with others. At 5 o'clock, as Michelle was getting ready to leave, Richard's secretary, a middle-aged blonde woman named Jennifer, approached her. "Michelle, Mr. Richard wants to speak with you privately." Michelle hesitated. Meeting alone with Richard again could be dangerous, especially now that he knew she had incriminating information. "It can be right here," Michelle said. He insisted it be in his office. Michelle looked around. The floor was nearly empty, with only a few accounting employees still at their desks. "All right, but I'll leave the door open." Jennifer nodded and walked her to Richard's office. He was sitting behind his desk with a serious expression. "Have a seat, please," he said, pointing to the chair across from the desk. Michelle sat but remained alert. "I've thought a lot about our conversation today," Richard began, "and I've come to a conclusion." "What is it?" "You're right. What we did was wrong." Michelle hadn't expected that response. She stayed silent, waiting for what would come next. "My father-in-law, Wei Jiang, he's a very powerful man. When he decided you were a problem, I had no choice but to go along." "There's always a choice," Michelle said. "You don't know Wei Jiang, he doesn't take no for an answer." Richard stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. "I know this doesn't excuse what we did, but I want you to understand that I'm also a victim in this story." "How so?" "Wei Jiang has information about me that could destroy my career and my family. He's been blackmailing me for years." Michelle processed this. If true, the situation was even more complicated than she'd imagined. "What kind of information?" Richard returned to his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a folder and handed it to Michelle. "See for yourself." Inside were photos of Richard entering and leaving an apartment, always accompanied by the same young woman. There were also bank transfer records and hotel receipts. "Wei Jiang found out I was having an affair 5 years ago," Richard explained. "He said he'd tell my wife and the company's board if I didn't do what he asked." "And what did he ask?" "At first, small things, facilitating contracts, sharing insider information about bids. But then it got worse." Richard sat back down, suddenly looking older. "When Wei Jiang said you were getting too close to the truth about his business, he demanded I find a way to push you out. The lawsuit was his idea." Michelle felt a mix of anger and pity. On one hand, Richard had actively helped ruin her life. On the other, he seemed genuinely remorseful and also a victim. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm tired. Tired of living under blackmail, tired of doing things I know are wrong. And because you didn't deserve any of this." Richard opened another drawer and took out a thick envelope. "This is everything I could gather as compensation. I know it doesn't make up for what you lost, but it's a start." Michelle looked at the envelope without taking it. "I don't want your money, Richard. I want justice. And you'll get it. I'm willing to testify against Wei Jiang, admit my part in the scheme, do whatever it takes to make things right. What about your family, your career?" "My wife already suspects something. Maybe it's better she knows the truth. As for my career, I'd rather lose my job than keep being Wei Jiang's puppet." Michelle was surprised by Richard's honesty. She'd expected a difficult conversation, maybe even threats, not this open confession. "I need to think about this," she said. "Of course, but I want you to know that no matter what you decide, I'll contact a lawyer to formalize my confession. You deserve to have your name cleared." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Michelle left Richard's office with her head spinning. She didn't know what to think anymore. For 3 years she'd held on to anger and resentment toward him, and now she'd learned the situation was far more complex than she'd imagined. On her way home, she called Emily. "Sweetheart, I'll be a little late today. I need to make a stop first." "Okay, Mom, did something happen?" "A lot. I'll tell you when I get there." Michelle decided to visit Mrs. Margaret, a 68-year-old woman who had been her mentor when she first started working as a translator. Margaret had retired a few years ago, but still maintained important connections in the legal field. Her house was in Greenwich Village, on a quiet, tree-lined street. When Michelle rang the doorbell, the door opened to reveal the woman's warm smile. "Michelle, what a wonderful surprise! Come in, come in." They sat in the cozy living room, decorated with books and travel photographs. Mrs. Margaret served coffee and homemade cookies. "How have you been, my dear? It's been so long since we last saw each other." "It's been hard, Mrs. Margaret, really hard." Michelle told her the whole story, from the lawsuit that had destroyed her career to the events of the past few days. Mrs. Margaret listened in silence, only nodding occasionally. "My goodness, Michelle, what a complicated situation. I don't know what to do anymore. Part of me wants Richard and Wei Jiang to pay for everything they did, but another part of me is just tired of all the suffering." Mrs. Margaret took Michelle's hand gently. "Sweetheart, let me tell you something I learned in 40 years in this profession. Justice doesn't always come the way we expect, but it always comes." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've already won the most important part of this battle. You survived. You didn't give up. You raised your daughter with dignity despite all the hardships. But what about my reputation, everything I lost?" "Your true reputation was never lost, Michelle. The people who really knew you understood you'd never do anything dishonest. As for what you lost materially, well, you can recover that now." Mrs. Margaret stood up and went to a bookshelf, pulling out a folder. "You know, ever since you told me about that lawsuit 3 years ago, something didn't sit right with me. Wei Jiang has always had a questionable reputation in business circles." She opened the folder and showed Michelle several documents. "I did some discreet digging. I found out Wei Jiang had been investigated before for document forgery, but was never formally charged." Michelle looked through the papers with growing interest. "I also discovered he has ties to several shell companies, all registered under different fronts. Why didn't you show me this before?" "Because I didn't have enough proof. And you were so shaken, I thought it best to let you recover first. But now that you have direct evidence," Mrs. Margaret smiled, "now we can take this man down legally." The two women spent the next hour reviewing documents and planning their strategy. Mrs. Margaret knew lawyers who specialized in financial crimes and had contacts at the district attorney's office. "What do you think about Richard?" Mrs. Margaret asked. "I don't know. He seems remorseful, but he might just be trying to save himself. Probably a bit of both, but if he's really willing to confess and testify against Wei Jiang, that could be very valuable." When Michelle finally got home, it was past 9. Emily was waiting in the kitchen, surrounded by college prep books. "Mum, I was worried." "What happened?" Michelle told her about the conversation with Richard and the visit to Mrs. Margaret. Emily listened carefully, asking smart questions. "So you're going to sue them?" "I think so, but I don't know if it'll work." "Mom," Emily said, taking her mother's hand, "you always taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always necessary." "That's true." "Then do the right thing, no matter the outcome." The next morning, Michelle arrived at work with a strange feeling. She knew this might be one of the last days she'd be cleaning those halls. Richard was waiting for her near the elevators, his expression anxious. "Michelle, have you thought about our conversation?" "I have." "And?" "I'll accept your proposal to confess everything, but on one condition." "What?" "I want you to do it publicly, not just a statement for the lawyers. I want the whole company to know what happened." Richard swallowed hard. "This will destroy my career." "Your career is already destroyed, Richard. The difference is now you can choose to destroy it by doing the right thing." He nodded slowly. "When?" "Today, at the company-wide meeting at 3 o'clock. How do you know about the meeting? I hear a lot of things while cleaning these rooms, Michelle smiled. At 3 in the afternoon, the company's main auditorium was full. It was the monthly all-staff meeting, where goals and results were usually discussed. Michelle stood at the back of the room, still wearing her cleaning uniform. She had arranged with Richard that he would ask to speak at the end of the meeting. When the CEO opened the floor for comments, Richard stood up. "I'd like to make an important announcement." All heads turned toward him. Richard took a deep breath before continuing. 3 years ago, I participated in a scheme to harm a competent and honest professional. This person was falsely accused of professional misconduct and lost her career because of my actions. A murmur of surprise spread through the auditorium. The person in question is here with us today. She works as our cleaning staff because my partner Wei Jiang and I destroyed her previous professional life. Richard pointed to Michelle at the back of the room. Hundreds of eyes turned to her. Michelle Johnson is a highly qualified certified translator, fluent in 5 languages with 15 years of experience. She's cleaning our offices because we pushed her out of the job market with false accusations. The auditorium fell into absolute silence. Michelle felt all the emotions she had suppressed over the years rising to the surface. Today I publicly confess my guilt and ask for forgiveness, not just from Michelle, but from all of you who work honestly in this company. You deserve leaders with integrity, not people like me. Richard pulled an envelope from his pocket. This is my resignation letter. I'm also formalizing a full confession that will be submitted to the proper authorities. He stepped down from the stage and walked to where Michelle stood. He handed her the envelope and extended his hand. Forgive me, Michelle. I know it doesn't undo what's been done, but it's a start. Michelle looked at his outstretched hand for a few seconds before shaking it. Thank you, Richard, for having the courage to do the right thing. The auditorium erupted in murmurs and chatter. The CEO, clearly shocked, tried to regain control. Well, this is certainly an unexpected revelation. We'll need to investigate this properly. An accounting employee stood up. Excuse me, but if Michelle is a qualified translator, why isn't she working in her field? Other voices joined in. That's right. Why is a qualified professional working as a cleaner? What kind of company allows this to happen? The CEO, a man in his 50s named Robert Wilson, called for silence. Obviously, we need to understand this situation better. Michelle, could you stay after the meeting to talk? Michelle nodded. When the auditorium finally emptied, she was alone with Robert Wilson and 2 other executives. Michelle, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. For the next hour, Michelle recounted her full story. The executives listened in silence, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. This is a very serious situation, Robert said when she finished. If what you're saying is true, the company may be indirectly involved in criminal activities. I have all the evidence, said Michelle, showing the photos of the documents on her phone. I understand. We need to take immediate action. Robert turned to the other directors. First, I want all business involving Wei Jiang or any companies connected to him suspended immediately. Second, I want a full audit of all contracts signed by Richard over the last 5 years. He turned to Michelle. As for you, I'd like to offer a proposal. What kind of proposal? We know your qualifications go far beyond the work you are doing here. We'd like to offer you a position in our international division, working in translation and consulting. Michelle was surprised. The salary would match your experience and qualifications, Robert continued. We're also willing to fund any professional development you might need. Why would you do this? Because it's the right thing to do, and because a reputable company can't allow injustices like this to happen. Michelle asked for time to consider the offer. First, she needed to resolve the legal matter with Wei Jiang. In the following days, events unfolded quickly. Richard's confession triggered an official investigation that revealed a much larger scheme than anyone had imagined. Wei Jiang hadn't just falsified documents, he was also involved in money laundering and tax evasion. When investigators entered his office, they found evidence of crimes spanning over a decade. Other victims of Wei Jiang came forward, professionals whose careers had been destroyed in ways similar to Michelle's, small business owners who had lost contracts due to forged documents, families who had lost properties in fraudulent deals. The story made headlines in the local media. Michelle was interviewed by multiple outlets, always emphasizing that her fight wasn't just personal, it represented all those who had been wronged by similar schemes. 2 weeks after Richard's public confession, Michelle received an unexpected call. "Hello? Michelle? This is Dr. Daniel Thompson from Thompson & Associates." Michelle recognized the name. It was one of the most respected law firms in the city. "I'm calling because I represent several of Wei Jiang's victims. We'd like to propose a class action lawsuit against him and all the companies involved in the scheme." "Does that mean—" "It means you have a strong chance of recovering not just your financial losses, but also receiving substantial compensation for emotional damages." The offer was tempting, but Michelle knew legal battles could drag on for years. "Dr. Daniel, I'll join the lawsuit, but I don't want this to become the focus of my life. I want to move forward." "I completely understand. Leave the legal aspects to us. You focus on rebuilding your career." That's exactly what Michelle did. She accepted the company's offer and returned to her profession, this time, however, with a different perspective. "Sweetheart," she said to Emily one evening as they had dinner in their small apartment, "I've been thinking about something." "About what, Mum?" "Creating a program to help other professionals who've gone through situations like mine." "How so?" "Many people lose their careers because of injustices or just temporary financial struggles. I want to create a project that offers training, guidance, and opportunities for them to start fresh." Emily smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Mom. How would you do it?" "I'm still working out the details, but I have some contacts who could help." Michelle began developing the idea on weekends. She spoke with Mrs. Margaret, who offered to assist with the bureaucratic aspects. She spoke with other professionals who had faced similar hardships. The project grew organically. At first, it was just a WhatsApp group where people shared opportunities and supported each other. Later, it evolved into in-person meetings in a borrowed room at a public library. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 6 months after the events that changed her life, Michelle was in her new office at the company, reviewing the translation of an important contract when Robert Wilson knocked on the door. "Michelle, got a minute?" "Of course, Robert, come in." "How are you adjusting to the new position?" "Very well. Thank you again for the opportunity." "Actually, we should be the ones thanking you. Your work has been exemplary." Robert sat in the chair across from Michelle's desk. "I have a proposal for you." "Another proposal?" "The board heard about your project supporting professionals in need. We're impressed by the initiative. It's just a small thing I do on weekends." "Maybe it doesn't have to stay small. What if the company officially sponsored the project?" Michelle was surprised. "What do you mean?" "We could provide space, resources, even a small team. In return, it would be part of the company's social responsibility. And I'd keep my regular job." "Of course. But you'd also have dedicated time to develop and coordinate the project." The offer was more than Michelle could have dreamed. Not only had she rebuilt her career, but now she had the chance to turn her traumatic experience into something positive for others. "I need to think about the proposal," she said. "Of course. But I want you to know the board is very excited about the possibility." That night, Michelle talked to Emily about the new opportunity. "Mom, you'd be living your dream," her daughter said. "I always hear you talk about wanting to help others." "That's true, but I'm also afraid it might be too much responsibility." "Mom, you survived 3 years cleaning floors after losing everything. I think you can handle any challenge." Emily was right. Michelle had been through far worse and come out stronger. The next day, she went to Robert to accept the proposal. The project, named Fresh Start, launched 3 months later. The launch event took place in the auditorium of the same company where Michelle had once worked as a cleaner. The irony wasn't lost on her. There she was, in the very place where she'd been humiliated, now being applauded by hundreds as a leader and inspiration. During her opening speech, Michelle looked out at the audience and saw hopeful faces, people who had lost jobs, careers, dreams. She also saw company employees, including many who had only known her as the cleaning lady. "A year ago," she began, "I was mopping the floor of this very auditorium, not because there's anything wrong with cleaning, but because I'd lost the chance to practice the profession I'd studied and worked in for 15 years. The audience listened in silence. "Today, I'm not here to talk about revenge or bitterness, but about fresh starts, about how sometimes we need to lose everything to discover our true strength." Michelle briefly shared her story, focusing not on the suffering but on the lessons learned. The Fresh Start Project exists because we believe everyone deserves a second chance, that no one should be judged only by the worst moment of their life or career. When she finished, the audience rose in applause. Michelle saw tears in many eyes and knew she'd chosen the right path. In the following months, the Fresh Start Project grew beyond all expectations. Hundreds of professionals were reintegrated into the job market, and dozens of small businesses were launched with the program's guidance and support. Michelle's story became a symbol of resilience and triumph. She was invited to speak at universities, corporate events, and television programs. But the moment that moved her the most happened nearly a year after it all began. She was leaving the office when she saw a middle-aged man cleaning the lobby floor. She approached him. "Hi, how are you?" The man looked up, surprised that someone was speaking to him. "I'm fine, ma'am. What's your name?" "Joseph. Joseph Miller." "Nice to meet you, Joseph. I'm Michelle." "Are you the Michelle from the newspapers, the one who started that project?" "That's me." Joseph smiled shyly. "You're an inspiration for people like us." "Joseph, did you have another job before this?" "Yes, I was a civil engineer. I worked for 20 years building bridges and buildings, but 2 years ago my company went bankrupt and I couldn't find work in the field again." "Would you like to return to engineering?" "I'd love to, but who would hire a 55-year-old engineer who's been out of work for 2 years?" Michelle smiled. "How about we talk tomorrow about this? I know a few companies that value experience." Joseph's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that for me?" "Joseph, just over a year ago, I was exactly where you are now. Believe me, there's always hope." 6 months later, Joseph was working as an engineer at a mid-sized construction firm. He was just one of the 847 professionals who had been reintegrated through the Fresh Start Project. Michelle kept a small folder with photos and success stories. Each new achievement reminded her why she had chosen to turn her pain into purpose. One Friday afternoon, as she was organizing some documents, Emily walked into her office. "Mom, I have some news." "What news?" "I got accepted into law school." Michelle stood up and hugged her daughter, moved. "Congratulations, honey. I'm so proud of you." "Do you know why I chose law?" "Why?" "Because I want to defend people like you, people who've been wronged and need someone to fight for them." Michelle's heart swelled with emotion. Her daughter had grown up watching her fight against injustice and had chosen a path that would allow her to continue that fight. "You're going to be an amazing lawyer," Michelle said. "I learned from the best possible example." That evening, Michelle and Emily went out to dinner to celebrate. It was the same restaurant they used to visit on rare breaks during the hard years when Michelle worked as a cleaner. "Mom," Emily said during dessert, "do you regret anything?" "What do you mean?" "If you could go back in time and avoid everything that happened, would you?" Michelle thought for a few seconds. I don't know if I would." "Why?" "Because everything we went through brought us here. It led me to the Fresh Start Project. It led you to choose law. It helped hundreds of people rebuild their lives. So you think it was worth it?" "I don't think suffering is ever worth it on its own. But if we can turn it into something positive, if we can help others because of it, then maybe it gains some meaning." 2 years had passed since the day Michelle had been challenged to translate that document. The Fresh Start Project now operated in 3 different cities and had become a national reference for professional reintegration. Michelle received numerous awards and recognitions, but what made her proudest was a letter that arrived one Tuesday morning. The letter was from Richard Peterson. He had served an alternative sentence for his involvement in the scheme and now worked as a corporate compliance consultant, helping companies develop ethical policies. In the letter, He thanked Michelle again for her forgiveness and shared how his life had changed after he decided to do the right thing. "I lost my job. My wife almost left me. My children were ashamed of me," he wrote. "But for the first time in years, I can sleep peacefully, knowing I'm no longer part of anything dishonest." The letter ended with an invitation. Richard wanted to make a significant donation to the Fresh Start project. "I know money can't undo what was done," he wrote, "but I'd like part of what I earned in questionable ways to help people who've gone through situations like yours." Michelle accepted the donation. The money was used to create a microcredit fund to help professionals restart their careers or launch small businesses. Wei Jiang, meanwhile, was sentenced to several years in prison. His assets were seized and sold, and the proceeds were distributed among his victims as compensation. Michelle used her portion to buy a larger apartment for herself and Emily and to expand the Fresh Start project. On a Thursday afternoon, she was in her office when she received a call from Mrs. Margaret. "Michelle, dear, I have a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "The American Translators Association has decided to create an annual award for professionals who excel not just in technical skill, but also in social contribution." "How interesting." "The first award will go to you. The ceremony is next week." Michelle was moved. Receiving recognition from the body that regulated her profession meant her reputation was fully restored. The ceremony took place in the Grand Hall of the Supreme Court. Judges, lawyers, translators, and other legal professionals were in attendance. During her acceptance speech, Michelle spoke about the importance of professional integrity and how hardships can become opportunities for growth. "3 years ago," she said, "I thought my career was over forever. Today I realize it was only beginning in a different way." When she stepped off the stage, dozens of people greeted her. Among them was Jennifer, Richard's former secretary. "Michelle, do you remember me?" "Of course, Jennifer. How are you?" "Good. I wanted to apologize." "Apologize for what?" "For being complicit in everything that happened. I knew something was wrong, but I chose to pretend I saw nothing." "You don't need to apologize, Jennifer." "Yes, I do. And I want you to know your courage inspired me to change. I left that company and now work for an NGO fighting corporate corruption." Conversations like this became common in Michelle's life. Her story inspired people to find the courage to do the right thing, even when it meant personal sacrifice. 3 years after it all began, the Fresh Start project had helped over 2,000 professionals. Michelle decided to write a book about her experience and the lessons she'd learned. Titled "From the Floor to Fresh Start," the book became a bestseller and generated additional funds to expand the project to other states. At the book launch, Michelle looked around the packed bookstore and saw so many familiar faces: Mrs. Margaret, Robert Wilson, former colleagues, beneficiaries of the Fresh Start project, and countless others who had been part of her journey. Emily, now in her 3rd year of law school, introduced her mother. "My mother always taught me that we're not defined by our worst moments, but by what we do to overcome them," she said into the microphone. Her story proves that it's always possible to start fresh, no matter how difficult the situation. During the book signing, a young woman approached Michelle. "Mrs. Johnson, I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "My father joined the Fresh Start project last year. He had been unemployed for 2 years and had lost hope of finding work. Today, he's happy again with a job that values his experience. I'm so glad to hear that. He always says you're the one who saved our family." "It wasn't me, dear. It was his courage to keep going and the generosity of people who believed he deserved a second chance." The evening ended with Michelle feeling fulfilled, not because of fame or recognition, but because she knew her experience had become hope for others. 5 years had passed since that decisive day. Michelle now led an organization operating in 8 US states and had become an international reference for job reintegration. She was invited to speak at global conferences and advise governments on employment policies. But she always made sure to stay grounded, remembering where she'd started. One Monday morning, as she reviewed reports, her assistant announced an unexpected visitor. "Michelle, there's someone here who says they need to speak with you urgently." "Who is it?" "She says she's Wei Jiang's daughter." Michelle was surprised. Wei Jiang was still in prison, serving his sentence. She didn't know he had a daughter. "Send her in." A young woman around 25 entered the room. She was clearly of Asian descent, but spoke perfect English. "Mrs. Johnson, my name is Amy Jiang. I'm Wei Jiang's daughter." "Nice to meet you, Amy. Please have a seat." "Thank you. I know it must be strange to receive a visit from the daughter of the man who ruined your life. You aren't responsible for your father's actions." "Maybe not, but I want to do something to try and repair, even just a little, the damage he caused." Amy opened a folder and took out some documents. "When my father was arrested, I took over the family's legitimate businesses. I discovered he had stolen far more money than we'd imagined." "I see. I want to donate a significant amount to your project, but that's not all." Amy leaned forward. "I want to work with you. I have a degree in business and experience managing social projects. I know it might seem odd, but I'd like to dedicate my life to helping the victims of my father's crimes." Michelle was struck by the young woman's sincerity. "Why would you do this?" "Because I grew up believing my father was an honest, successful man. Learning the truth was devastating. I can't change what he did, but I can try to do better." "And your family? What do they think of this decision?" "My mother fully supports me. She also feels guilty for not realizing what was happening." Michelle thought for a moment. "Amy, I accept your donation and appreciate your offer to work with us. But I want you to understand one thing. If you join us, you'll be treated like any other employee. No privileges or special treatment." "That's exactly what I want." Amy began working at Fresh Start the following week. At first, some staff were wary, but she quickly proved her dedication and skill. 6 months later, she had become one of the organization's most effective coordinators. Her experience with different cultures and languages helped the project expand to assist immigrants and refugees too. One afternoon, as Michelle and Amy reviewed proposals for new projects, Amy asked an unexpected question. "Michelle, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Have you forgiven me?" "What do you mean?" "Have you forgiven my family for what we did to you?" Michelle stopped what she was doing and looked at Amy. "Amy, you have nothing to be forgiven for. As for your father, forgiveness isn't about him. It's about me. It's about not carrying anger and bitterness that would only harm me." "So you forgave him?" "I forgave him enough to move forward. That doesn't mean I approve of what he did or that he shouldn't be held accountable for his actions." "I understand." "Amy, you're doing something very brave by choosing a different path than your father. That's worth far more than any apology." 2 years later, Amy Jiang had practically become like a daughter to Michelle. Working together had created a special bond between them, built on mutual respect and a shared purpose. Emily, now a law school graduate working as a labor rights attorney, had also become a close friend of Amy's. The three women, coming from such different backgrounds, had found a way to turn trauma into purpose, pain into hope. One Friday afternoon, they were having lunch together when Emily made an announcement. "I have some news for you." "What news?" Michelle asked. "I'm getting married." Michelle nearly knocked over her water glass. "With whom? When did this happen?" "Remember Ryan, that lawyer I met during the Fresh Start project case?" "I remember," Amy said. "The tall, friendly guy?" "That's the one. We've been dating for 6 months and he proposed last week." Michelle stood up and hugged her daughter, moved. "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart." "And there's more," Emily said. "We want a simple wedding, but with one special feature." "What is it?" "Instead of gifts, we want guests to make donations to the Fresh Start project." Amy Jiang smiled. What a wonderful idea. The wedding took place 3 months later, in a simple but emotional ceremony. Among the guests were many beneficiaries of the Fresh Start project, co-workers and people who had become family over the years. Mrs. Margaret, now 73, was Emily's matron of honor. Robert Wilson stood as the symbolic best man, a role that had been offered to the Fresh Start project. During the ceremony, Michelle looked around at all the faces and thought about how much life had changed in recent years. From a broken woman cleaning floors, she had become a respected leader, a proud mother, and a mentor to dozens of people. But the most moving moment of the celebration came when Joseph, the former engineer she had once found working as a janitor, approached her. "Mrs. Michelle, I wanted to thank you again." "Joseph, you don't have to thank me every time we meet." "Yes, I do, and I want you to know something." Joseph smiled and pointed to a young woman talking with Emily. "That's my youngest daughter, Amy. She graduated high school this year." "That's wonderful, Joseph. She wants to study business administration, says she wants to work in social projects like yours." Michelle looked at young Amy and saw the same spark in her eyes that she had seen in Amy Zhang when she first walked into her office. "It would be an honor to have Amy working with us." "Actually," Joseph said, lowering his voice, "she doesn't know I'm talking to you about this, but I wanted to ask if there might be an internship position for her." "Joseph, there's always room for dedicated people in the project." 2 years after Emily's wedding, the Fresh Start project celebrated its 10th anniversary. The organization now operated in 15 states and had helped over 10,000 professionals. The celebration took place in the same auditorium where Michelle had given her first speech as the project's director. Hundreds attended, including government officials, business leaders, and many program beneficiaries. During her keynote speech, Michelle reflected on the journey. "When I started mopping floors in this building, I never imagined I'd be standing here 10 years later, talking about hope and fresh starts to hundreds of people." The audience applauded, but what I've learned over these years is that our story isn't determined by where we begin or the obstacles we face. It's determined by the choices we make when we're at our lowest point. Michelle looked at Emily, who sat in the front row, holding her 2-year-old son. She looked at Amy Zhang, who had become one of the organization's most respected leaders. She looked at Mrs. Margaret, Joseph, Amy, and so many other faces representing stories of resilience. The Fresh Start project isn't mine, it's ours. It belongs to everyone who believed that a second chance, a new opportunity, a fresh start is always possible. When the celebration ended, Michelle stayed alone in the auditorium for a few minutes. She walked slowly between the empty chairs, remembering that distant day when Richard had laughed at her and thrown the document on the table. Amy Zhang appeared at the door. "Michelle, are you okay?" "I'm wonderful. Just thinking." "About what?" "How sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to our greatest moments." Amy stepped closer. "You know what amazes me most about your story?" "What?" "You could have become bitter, vengeful. You could have used your experience to attack others, but you chose to turn it into something that helps. I learned that anger only hurts us. Revenge doesn't bring peace. What brings peace is knowing our pain can ease someone else's." They left the auditorium together, walking through the halls that had once been Michelle's most humiliating workplace. 15 years had passed since that fateful day. The Fresh Start project had become an international model, studied in universities and replicated in other countries. Michelle, now 62, decided it was time to pass the torch to a new generation. Amy Zhang, after 15 years of dedication, was chosen to lead the organization. The transition ceremony took place on a sunny spring afternoon. Michelle gave an emotional speech, symbolically passing responsibility to Amy. "When I started this project," she said, "I thought I was creating something to help others. Only later did I realize the person who benefited most was me." "How so?" someone in the audience asked. "Because I found my purpose. I found a way to give meaning to everything I'd suffered. And most of all, I found a family." Michelle looked at Amy, standing beside her. "Amy, you're not just my successor. You're the daughter life gave me in the most unexpected way." Amy couldn't hold back tears. "Michelle, everything I am today is because of you and the example you set." "No, dear. Everything you are comes from your own brave choices." Emily, now a mother of 3 and one of the organization's lead attorneys, also took the stage. "I grew up watching my mother turn pain into hope, tears into smiles, defeat into victory. She taught me that no matter how many times life knocks us down, we can always get back up." After the ceremony, Michelle officially retired but remained as an advisor. She devoted herself to writing more books, giving talks, and spending time with her grandchildren. One autumn afternoon, she sat on a bench in the park near her home when a man approached. "Excuse me, are you Michelle Johnson?" "That's me." "My name is Robert. I'm 45 and lost my job 6 months ago. Someone told me about the Fresh Start project." Michelle smiled. "Robert, the project is still here and stronger than ever, but I'm not the one running it anymore." "But you're the one who started it, right?" "I did, yes." "So you understand what I'm going through?" "I understand perfectly." Robert sat on the bench next to Michelle. "Sometimes I think I won't be able to get out of this. I have a family to support, bills to pay, but no one wants to hire someone my age. Robert, can I tell you something?" "Of course." 20 years ago, I was cleaning floors because I had lost everything. I thought my life was over at 42. And what did you do? I kept going, one day at a time, one small victory at a time, and I discovered that sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true strength. Robert listened in silence. "Today, at 62, I can say the last 20 years have been the best of my life. Not because they were easy, but because they were meaningful. Do you think there's still hope for me?" "Robert, as long as we're alive, there's always hope. There's always a chance for a fresh start." Michelle wrote down the address of the Fresh Start project on a piece of paper. "Go there tomorrow. Ask for Amy Zhang. Tell them Michelle sent you." "You'd do that for me?" "Robert, 20 years ago, someone gave me a second chance when I needed it most. This is just my way of paying it forward." Robert thanked her, moved and left with the paper in hand. Michelle stayed on the bench, watching him walk away, remembering so many others who had crossed her path over the years. That night at home, Michelle opened her laptop and began writing. "If someone had told me 20 years ago that being humiliated by an arrogant director would be the best day of my life, I wouldn't have believed it. But that's exactly what happened. In that moment of pain and humiliation, not just my revenge was born, but my redemption." She was writing her full memoirs, a book that would tell the entire journey from her first day as a cleaner to founding the organization that had transformed thousands of lives. "Mum," said Emily, entering the room with a cup of tea, "still working?" "I'm finishing the last chapter." "How does it end?" Michelle smiled and typed the final lines. "Today, when I look back, I don't see a story of a victim who became victorious. I see the story of a woman who discovered that true power isn't in never falling, but in always getting up, who learned that the best revenge against injustice is to create more justice in the world." "The ending is about hope," Michelle told Emily. "Always about hope." The next morning, Michelle got a call from Amy Zhang. "Michelle, do you remember that Robert you referred yesterday?" "Of course. What happened?" "He showed up here early this morning before we even opened. He was nervous but determined. And we found out he has incredible experience in logistics. One of our partner companies was looking for someone exactly like him." "That's wonderful. But you know what impressed me the most?" "What?" "When he realized we could help him, the first thing he asked was, 'How can I help others going through the same thing as me?'" Michelle smiled. It was always like this. The people who had faced hardship were the first to want to help others in similar situations. "Amy, that reminds me why we started all this. To give hope." "Exactly. To show that it's always possible to start fresh." That afternoon, Michelle decided to make a special visit. She drove to the building where she had worked as a cleaner 20 years earlier. The place had been renovated, but she still recognized every detail. She entered the lobby and greeted the security guard. "Good afternoon. I'd like to visit the 32nd floor. Do you have an appointment?" "Actually, I used to work here. I just wanted to take a quick look for sentimental reasons." The guard, a young man, didn't recognize her. To him, Michelle was just a well-dressed woman making a nostalgic visit. "Of course, ma'am. You can go up." In the elevator, Michelle remembered all the times she had climbed those same floors carrying cleaning supplies, invisible to most people. When the doors opened on the 32nd floor, she was met with the same marble hallway, now gleaming under modern LED lights. "Can I help you?" asked a receptionist. "I'm Michelle Johnson. I used to work here a few years ago." Michelle Johnson? The Michelle Johnson from the Fresh Start project. The same. The young woman stood up excitedly. Oh my goodness. It's an honor to meet you. My mum was part of your program 5 years ago. That's wonderful to hear. She always says you're the one who saved our family. Michelle spent a few minutes chatting with the receptionist, then asked to walk through the halls alone. She stopped in front of the office that used to belong to Richard Peterson. Now it was occupied by a young woman working intently at her computer. She continued walking until she reached the exact spot where it had all begun, the hallway near the elevators, where Richard had thrown the document on the glass table. The table was still there, but now it was decorated with corporate magazines and a potted plant. Michelle approached and gently touched the glass surface. In that very spot 20 years earlier, her life had changed forever. "Thank you," she whispered. "Excuse me," said a voice behind her. Michelle turned and saw a woman in a cleaning uniform carrying work supplies. "Sorry, I was just reminiscing." "It's okay," the woman said, smiling. "Do you work here?" "Not anymore, but I used to." The woman looked curious. "Which department?" "Cleaning." The woman's expression changed immediately. "Really? You were in cleaning too?" "I was, for 3 years. And now?" "Now I run, well, I used to run a non-profit." The woman stopped what she was doing. "How did you get out of cleaning?" "It's a long story. But I can tell you there's always a chance for change, even when it seems impossible. Sometimes it's hard to believe that." "What's your name?" "Deborah. Deborah Williams." "Deborah, have you heard of the Fresh Start project?" "I have." "Isn't that the program that helps people find better jobs?" "Exactly." "How about I give you their contact?" "You'd do that?" "Deborah, 20 years ago, someone gave me an opportunity when I needed it most. Maybe it's your turn now." Michelle wrote down Amy Zhang's contact and handed it to Deborah. "Look for Amy Zhang. Tell her Michelle referred you." "Thank you so much, Mrs. Johnson." "Deborah, can I give you some advice?" "Of course." Never let anyone make you feel like the work you do doesn't matter. Dignity doesn't come from the job we have, but from the honesty and dedication we put into it. Deborah nodded, moved. "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. You're very kind." When Michelle left the building, she felt complete. She had come full circle, returning to where it all began to help someone else in the same situation she had been in 20 years earlier. 6 months later, Deborah called Michelle. "Mrs. Johnson, it's Deborah. Remember me?" "Of course, Deborah. How are you?" "I wanted to thank you. Because of your referral, I got into a training program for human resources. Now I'm working as an administrative assistant at a company that values people like me." "I'm so happy for you, Deborah. But that's not all. I want to do what you did for me." "What do you mean?" "I want to help others who are struggling. I've already referred 3 friends to the Fresh Start project." Michelle smiled. That was how it worked. One person helped another, who helped another, creating an endless chain of hope and solidarity. "Deborah, you've understood the spirit of the project perfectly. I learned from the best teacher." That night, Michelle finished writing her memoirs. The book would tell her entire journey, from the initial humiliation to the creation of the organization that had helped thousands of people. But more importantly, it would speak about the power of resilience, about how it's possible to turn pain into purpose, defeat into victory. 2 years later, the book, From the Floor to Fresh Start, A Journey from Humiliation to Hope, became one of the country's best-selling titles. Michelle used all the book's proceeds to create a scholarship fund for children of workers in socially vulnerable situations. One summer afternoon, she was signing books at a bookstore in New York City when a young woman approached the table. "Mrs. Michelle, my name is Olivia. I'm a psychology student." "Nice to meet you, Olivia. I wanted to thank you for your book. My mother read it and decided to go back to school at 50. Now she has a degree in education and teaches adult literacy." "What a wonderful story. But there's more. She always says it was your example that showed her it's never too late for a fresh start." Olivia hesitated for a moment. "Actually, I came here to ask you something." "What is it?" "I'm in my final year of college, and I want to write my thesis on resilience and professional reinvention. I'd love to use your story as a case study. It would be an honor, Olivia. Would you be willing to give a few interviews for my research? Of course, but I'd like to make a suggestion. What is it? How about expanding your research? I know hundreds of people who've gone through similar stories. Your work could show that my experience isn't unique, but part of a pattern of human perseverance. Olivia's eyes lit up. That would be incredible. 6 months later, Olivia defended her thesis titled Resilience and Reinvention: How People in Vulnerable Situations Transform Adversity into Opportunity. The research made national headlines and caught the attention of international universities. Olivia was invited to pursue her master's in Canada, specifically studying job reintegration programs. Mrs. Michelle, she said on the day of her defense, all of this started with your example. No, Olivia. It started with your curiosity and dedication. I just planted a seed. You were the one who made it grow. 25 years had passed since that life-changing day. Michelle, now 67, was a grandmother of 5 and a great-grandmother of 2. The Fresh Start project had expanded to 17 countries and helped over 50,000 people worldwide. Amy Zhang, now 50, had become one of the most respected social leaders in the United States. Emily led the organization's legal department and was a university professor. One spring morning, Michelle was in her garden playing with her grandchildren when Emily arrived with special news. "Mom, I have something to tell you." "What is it, dear?" "The United Nations has invited you to speak at the General Assembly about overcoming adversity and social development." Michelle was surprised. "But I'm retired, dear." "Mom, you may have retired from leading the project, but you'll never retire from being an inspiration to people." The UN invitation represented the ultimate international recognition of the work Michelle had begun in a moment of deep personal pain. 3 months later, she stood at the podium of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, facing representatives from 193 countries. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, 25 years ago, I was a 42-year-old woman cleaning the floors of a corporate office. I had lost my career, my home, my dignity. The auditorium was completely silent. Today I stand before you not to speak about my personal story, but about something far greater: the infinite power of a fresh start. For 20 minutes, Michelle spoke about resilience, hope, and the importance of public policies that offer second chances to people in vulnerable situations. Every person struggling today could be the leader, the innovator, the problem solver our world needs tomorrow, she concluded, but only if we give them the opportunity for a fresh start. Her speech ended with a 5-minute standing ovation. Representatives from dozens of countries approached Michelle after the presentation, interested in implementing versions of the Fresh Start project in their own regions. That evening in her Manhattan hotel, Michelle called Amy Zhang in the United States. "How was it?" Amy asked. "Unreal. 25 years ago, I was invisible, scrubbing floors. Today, I spoke to the world about the importance of seeing and valuing every person. You've always had that gift, Michelle, seeing worth where others only saw problems. Amy, I have a proposal for you." "What is it?" "How about we expand the Fresh Start project internationally? With the UN's support, we could create a global network of hope." "Michelle, even retired, you still dream big." "I've learned one thing over the years. When we turn our pain into purpose, there's no limit to the good we can do." 2 years later, the global Fresh Start network was operating in 40 countries, adapted to each region's cultural and economic specifics. Michelle began traveling the world as the project's ambassador, always accompanied by Amy or Emily. During one trip, she visited a refugee camp in Africa, where a version of the project had been implemented to help people rebuild their lives after conflict. "Mrs. Michelle," a refugee woman said through a translator, "your story gives us hope. If you could start over after losing everything, so can we." Moments like these reminded Michelle why it had all been worth it. Every humiliation endured, every tear shed, every sleepless night was justified when she saw the spark of hope in people's eyes as they realized they could begin again. Back in the United States, Michelle decided to write her final book, a compilation of the most inspiring stories of those helped by the project over the years. "Mom," Emily said when she heard about the project, "it'll be like a living memorial to everything you've built." "Not what I built, dear, what we built together. Every life we touched, every story of overcoming, they're all part of this book." The book, Fresh Start Stories, 25 Years Transforming Pain into Hope, was launched in a special ceremony at the same auditorium where Michelle had first publicly shared her story 25 years earlier. Hundreds attended, including Deborah, the former cleaning staff member Michelle had helped. Deborah now ran her own HR consulting business. "Mrs. Michelle," Deborah said during the event, "you taught me that a person's worth isn't in their job title, but in the dignity with which they live their life." Also present was Robert, the 45-year-old man Michelle had met in the square. He now coordinated a government job placement program. "Michelle," he said, "that day in the square changed my life. Not just because you referred me to the project, but because you showed me age is never a barrier to starting over." And there was Olivia, the young student who had written her thesis on resilience. She had returned from Canada with a PhD and now led a research institute on social inclusion policies. "Mrs. Michelle," Olivia said, "your story didn't just change my academic path. It changed how I see the world and my commitment to social justice." During her final speech at the ceremony, Michelle reflected on the journey. 25 years ago, in this very place, a powerful man laughed at me and challenged me to translate a document, thinking he was making a cruel joke. He didn't know he was changing the course of thousands of lives. The audience laughed, but it was a warm laugh from people who knew that story intimately. Today, I can say that was the best day of my life. Not because it was easy or pleasant, but because it was the day I discovered my true purpose in the world. Michelle looked at Amy Zhang, who was seated in the front row. "Amy, you who knew my father at his worst, saw how it's possible to choose a different path. You turned your family's shame into pride through your actions." Amy Zhang was visibly moved. "And you, Emily," Michelle continued, looking at her daughter, "grew up seeing that justice isn't something that just happens. It's something we have to fight for every day." When the ceremony ended, Michelle left the auditorium for the last time as a public figure. At 70 years old, she had decided to step away completely from public life to dedicate herself fully to her family. But her retirement lasted only 6 months. One autumn morning, she was making coffee when the doorbell rang. It was a young woman, about 20 years old, clearly nervous. "Mrs. Michelle, my name is Amanda. I need help." Michelle invited her in and offered coffee. "What happened, Amanda?" "I lost my job 3 months ago. I'm about to be evicted from my apartment. My 2-year-old son. I don't know what to do anymore." The young woman began to cry. "Someone told me you've been through similar hardships and could give me advice." Michelle sat beside Amanda and took her hand. "Sweetheart, tell me everything from the beginning." Over the next hour, Amanda shared her story. She was a single mother, laid off due to budget cuts and couldn't find a new job because she had no one to care for her son. "Amanda," Michelle said when she finished, "have you heard of the Fresh Start project?" "I've heard of it, but I thought it was only for more qualified people. The project is for people who need a second chance, no matter their qualifications or situation." Michelle picked up the phone and called Amy Zhang directly. "Amy, it's me. I have a young woman here who needs our urgent help." 3 days later, Amanda was enrolled in a sales training course and had secured a spot for her son at a daycare partnered with the project. A month later, she was working at a clothing store and had negotiated a payment plan for her overdue rent. "Mrs. Michelle," she said in a call, "how can I ever thank you?" "Amanda, the same way everyone who's been through this does, by helping the next person in need." And that's exactly what Amanda did. 2 years later, she had become one of the most active volunteers at Fresh Start, specializing in helping single mothers in vulnerable situations. Michelle watched these stories multiply with the satisfaction of someone who had planted a seed that grew far beyond what she ever imagined. At 75, she still received occasional visits from people seeking guidance, but her routine was now mostly family-focused. One Sunday afternoon, she was gathered with her whole family to celebrate her eldest grandson's 10th birthday when Emily made a special announcement. "Family, I want to share a decision I've made." Everyone paid attention. "I've decided to write Mom's official biography, not just the story of the project, but her entire life journey." "Sweetheart," Michelle said, "my life isn't that interesting." "Mom, your life is living proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have courage and determination." Amy Zhang, who was present at the family meeting, agreed. "Michelle, your story needs to be told to future generations. It's a legacy of hope." "Besides," Emily continued, "part of the book's proceeds will go toward creating an educational foundation in your name." Michelle was moved but tried to protest. "There's no need for a foundation with my name." "Mom," Emily interrupted, "this isn't about you. It's about perpetuating the values you represent: resilience, hope, solidarity." 2 years later, the book Michelle Johnson, The Woman Who Transformed Humiliation into Hope, was released simultaneously in 15 countries. The work not only told Michelle's personal story, but also the social impact of the Fresh Start project and the stories of hundreds of people who had been helped. The book became a global publishing phenomenon, translated into more than 20 languages. Universities began including Michelle's story in psychology, business, and social work curricula as an example of resilient leadership. At the book launch in the United States, Michelle, now 77, gave her last public speech. "More than 30 years ago," she said, "I was a broken woman scrubbing floors to survive. Today I see how that experience turned into a blessing, not just for me, but for thousands around the world." She looked at the audience filled with familiar and unfamiliar faces. "If there's one message I want to leave, it's this: never underestimate the power of a fresh start. Never believe it's too late to change, to grow, to serve." The speech ended with the audience on their feet, applauding not just Michelle but everything she stood for. After the ceremony, she was greeted by hundreds of people. Among them was an elderly man who approached timidly. "Mrs. Michelle, my name is Richard Peterson." Michelle was surprised. It was the same Richard who had started it all 30 years earlier, now with white hair and a serene expression. "Richard, how are you?" "I'm well, Mrs. Michelle, very well." They spoke for a few minutes. Richard shared that he had devoted himself to ethical consulting after serving his sentence, and that his work had helped dozens of companies develop fairer organizational cultures. "Mrs. Michelle," he said before leaving, "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For giving me the chance to do the right thing, for showing me it's never too late to change." "Richard, you made your own decision to change. I just offered the opportunity." And that's what made all the difference. As Richard walked away, Michelle reflected on how life can come full circle. The man who had once been her tormentor had, in his own way, also become an agent of positive change. 5 years later, at 82, Michelle sat in her favorite garden chair watching her great-grandchildren play, when Amy arrived with special news. "Michelle, I just got a call from Sweden." "Sweden? You've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize." Michelle nearly dropped her teacup. "You're joking, Amy." "I'm not. The nomination came from a group of international organizations working on social reintegration. But I haven't done anything worthy of a Nobel." "Michelle, you created a global movement that transformed the lives of over 100,000 people directly and millions indirectly. If that doesn't deserve worldwide recognition, I don't know what does." The news spread quickly. International media sought Michelle for interviews, universities wanted to award her honorary degrees, and global organizations invited her to speak. But Michelle, true to her simple ways, declined most invitations. "Amy," she said, "if I win this award, I want to use it to amplify our message of hope. But I don't want this to become about me. It's about all the people who had the courage to start fresh." The Nobel announcement came on an October morning. Michelle had been chosen for her extraordinary contribution to human dignity by creating opportunities for people in socially vulnerable situations. When the phone rang with the official news, Michelle was surrounded by her entire family: Emily, Amy Zhang, her grandchildren and great-grandchildren all gathered for a Sunday lunch. "Mom," Emily said, tears in her eyes, "you did it. The whole world recognizes your contribution." "My dear," Michelle replied, "the prize is beautiful, but the real recognition came long ago, the smile of every person who managed to start fresh." The Nobel ceremony took place in December, in Oslo. Michelle, now 82, stepped onto the podium with the same humility that had always defined her. In her speech, she didn't speak about herself, but about all the unnamed people who fight daily to overcome hardships. "This award isn't mine," she said. "It belongs to every person who had the courage to rise after a fall, to everyone who chose to help rather than judge, to everyone who believes there is always hope." When she returned to the United States, Michelle used the prize money to create a permanent fund that would ensure the Fresh Start project continued for decades to come. End of story. Now, tell us what you thought of this journey of resilience and transformation. Do you believe Michelle made the right decisions along the way? Which moment moved you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your sincere reflections on this inspiring story of fresh starts and hope.